All right. So what we've been doing for the past couple months with breaks in between for various Sundays is going back to the roots, going back to the basics. The book that I wrote 10, 15 years ago now, The Fifth Way, was my expression of the type of spirituality that we are trying to practice here at The Effect. Works for recovery and it works for spiritual formation as well. It's amazing. When you take Jesus and you put him back into his original Hebrew Aramaic setting, everything comes clear. All those difficult passages that didn't make any sense, the ones that seemed to be just off somehow, all coalesce and come back into this perfect center, always pointing to the Father's love, always making perfect common sense, and allowing Jesus to speak as his first hearers would have understood him. Not as us from an alien culture 2,000 years away are trying to understand through layers of accretion, but really, can we end run all of that? What does it take for a modern Westerner to take the journey to be able to actually sit at the feet of an ancient Eastern Jesus and understand? And so that's what the Fifth Way is about. That's what our journey is about. We, as professed followers of Jesus, following him as best as we can from that original understanding. And once we do that, we realize that Jesus was a mystic and a contemplative. The way that he prayed out in the lonely places in silence. And so we practice as much as we can personally in our own lives, the silent prayer of contemplation as well, to try to move out of the way all the distractions, understanding that our spiritual growth is not about addition, it's about subtraction. It's not about acquisition, it's about relinquishment. When we get everything out of the way. What's that line from Sherlock Holmes? When you've eliminated everything that's impossible, whatever remains, however implausible, must be the truth. It's kind of like that. We eliminate everything that is distracting us and telling us something different about the nature of life and ourselves and our relationships, and then we get down to the core of it. 2 weeks ago, because we took a break last week to do something different, we went through an overview of the 5 ways, the first 4 ways and the 5th way. And that was a really big bite. And just as a quick recap, the first 4 ways are the ways that we use to get anywhere across the face of the earth. It's a way that we acquire the things that we need as living physical beings. And so mirroring the 4 main sects of Judaism in the first century when Jesus was on the earth, the Sadducees, Pharisees, Essenes, and the Zealots, they all had characteristic ways of dealing with the Roman occupation and the challenges to their lives, both their national life and their personal lives. They could yield to the power that was in front of them. They could try to influence or manipulate it. They could exit, just leave, or they could try to tear it down. And when you think about it, those are the 4 options that every single one of us has, whether it's in a marriage or whether it's in a government. We can yield, influence, exit, or destroy. But what Jesus does is bring a 5th way, which takes all those 4 ways and turns them completely on their heads. Instead of working from top down, it's bottom up. Instead of working from outside in, it's inside out. Instead of working from front to back, it's back to front. If we want to acquire something in life, in our spiritual lives, we have to relinquish in order to make that happen. If we want power and control, we need to give it away. If we want attention, we give it away. If we want relevance or love, we give it away, and then we find out what is really ours. Because the truth of the matter is that Jesus starts from abundance and not scarcity. The 4 ways are operating on a scarcity, that we need to acquire something. Jesus says everything that you need is already here. Everything the Father has is already yours. And so it's not a matter of acquiring anything else. It's about letting go and stripping away anything that distracts us from everything that we already have. And so that's a lot to digest, and it has such far-reaching implications in every facet of our lives that I wanted to stop and pull back a little bit and take some time to really see if we can get this to sink in, the immensity of what this 5th way means as opposed to the other 4 that we're so familiar with. And what we need to do is we need to really consider how disturbing this is. This disturbing to our worldview, how much this messes with our heads to try to think about how opposite all of this is. And if we don't take the time to really consider how disturbing it is, how different it is, how alien it is, then what we're going to end up doing is reinterpreting it to fit what we already think we know. And unfortunately, that's what's happened to Jesus' message. It has been fit to Greek philosophy and Roman law, and which we are the heirs of, rather than letting it speak for itself, because it was just too big, it was too different. It's why we don't use the Sermon on the Mount very much to order our church life. We use Paul, because Paul's letters have structure to them, and necessarily so. But Jesus' message is anarchy, pure anarchy, if you just let it sit. An example would be that 2 weeks ago, just in kind of a passing reference, I was talking about how Jews feel about Hasatan, Satan, how different that one aspect of their worldview, their theology is, and how it changes so much about how we view this. I talked about it in terms of, we talked about Jesus' wilderness experience and how he was tempted by the adversary. But we made it clear that the way we think of the devil, or the way we think of Satan as an entity, is not the way the Jews thought about him. The words that were used there was satana in Aramaic, which means the accuser or the adversary, but it's a title. It's not a proper name. And akel kartsa meant peace eater. That's the other word that's used in that same passage for this tempter. And the peace eater is the one we would say a backbiter, right? We would say a slanderer. But it's the one who accuses. It's the one that brings the difficulties and the challenges to bear. In Hebrew, it's hasatan. Ha is a definite article, so it's the Satan, the accuser, the adversary. And so there's a big difference there between them. And yet, there's big resistance to understanding even that one aspect of our theology in a different way. It feels like an attack on our tradition. It feels like an attack on the Bible as we know it. And so there's a lot of pushback. But this one example, it really illustrates the Jewish and Hebrew foundations of Jesus' teaching. If Jesus didn't take time to redefine a term, it means whatever the people that he was talking to thought about that term was okay with him. He didn't take any time to redefine Hasatan. You could say his whole ministry was a redefinition of kingdom because they needed that, but not this. And so our best understanding of Jesus would be to understand the way the people, the hearers of Jesus, understood these terms. And that's what we're trying to do here. Because how is a Westerner, a modern Westerner, supposed to approach this Eastern Jesus without a willingness to be disturbed, without a willingness to challenge the things that we think we know, that we don't even know may be standing in the way of really understanding and becoming intimately connected with Jesus? And unless we're willing to let it all go, sell everything, Jesus says, we won't know what can come back and not be limiting to us. I remember years ago when I broached this subject, there was a woman who came up to me and she said, this is the first time I've heard you speak that I wasn't completely won over. I love that. I love that. That to me is so much more useful than just coming and saying, hey, that was a lovely sermon. I love for people to come up and say, I don't know about that. Good. That's great. If you don't know about it, then that's the place to start. But it got you thinking, right? Made you look, that sort of thing. It got you thinking. That's what we're trying to do here. It always sparks a lively conversation when you start talking about the devil, I guarantee you. And people will go back after I say some of the things that I typically say, and they go look it up, they do some research, and it reminded me when some of them would come back and talk to me about it. When I, in another lifetime, was a teacher of middle school, 4th through 8th grade, I think one of the 8th graders, I had said something in class. She came back the next day, and she said, Mr. B, because that's what they called me, Mr. B. Mr. B, I looked up what you said, and it was right. She was like so amazed. It was right. What do you think? I'm going to teach you something that's wrong? But that's what we do. We want the corroboration, and it is so useful to go back and do your own research. That's what you're going to remember, not just what someone told you, but when you go back and you look it up and you uncover it and you take the journey as if for the first time it's ever been taken, because for you it is, it changes things. My own study of the Hebrew roots of Christianity were exactly like that. My head was spinning, and there was nobody really to talk to about it. There was no one to really have any camaraderie with. I couldn't talk to my church. They would have been totally against anything that I was trying to learn in this direction. And there really wasn't that much out there. 30 years ago, try to find anything on the Aramaic Jesus. Thankfully now, it's becoming more mainstream. You can find these materials, but not back then. And I was wondering, why were there no churches that were teaching this stuff? Why was that I had to find out by trying to uncover all these dusty books and find some books that I could learn something about? And I realize now and then, too, that part of it was ignorance. They'd never been taught these things. And the Hebrew roots of Christianity were just not passed on from generation to generation. I grew up Catholic. There was no talk of the Hebrew roots of Christianity in that church. And then when I ended up in the evangelical church in my 30s, certainly was no talk of the Hebrew roots there. But I realized that there's something beyond that, that even those who may have known about this were consciously hiding it. They weren't allowing it to come to the fore because it didn't fit the narrative. It didn't fit the tradition. It didn't fit a literalist view of Scripture, reading Scripture absolutely literally in some cases. In some cases, the literal view, but only from a Hebrew point of view, right, is really going to give us what we need. But reading it in English, it really messes things up. And so there was this kind of putting it into the back room behind a locked door that you would do with a child you don't want anyone to meet. Some of that was going on. But I have realized here that my job is not to decide what you should or should not know. My job is just to throw it all out there and see what sticks. Expose you to the things that I think are useful. I'm not going to expose you to anything that seems useless. But then you decide, what is it that you need to be disturbed by enough to actually consider? Are you willing to be disturbed? And then consider it all. And then bring in what you need to bring in. So I wanted to dig in just a little bit here, because this idea of angels and free will in Jewish thought is a fundamental shift and a fundamental difference with what we believe as Christians. And even though it's one kind of slice and it seems maybe a little bit arcane, it really undercuts a huge part of the way that we experience our faith. So let's dig in a little bit. In classical and normative Hebrew theology in Judaism, the predominant view is that angels have no free will. I mean, did you ever think about that? We're supposed to have free will. But Jews don't believe, by and large, that angels have free will. They exist solely to perform God's will, as pure manifestations of God's will. They act as instruments to execute specific divine commands, like celestial messengers or forces, rather than independent beings with moral choice. Now, the language in the Old Testament, if you read about the appearances of angels, it's fluid, it's ambiguous. And you can't really tell whether you're looking at an angel or whether you're seeing God, because it seems to morph one into the other. And that's by design, because of the way that the Jews felt. The angels weren't really separate from God. They were extensions or manifestations of God and his will. Remember we talked about the Hebrews looked at function over form? They weren't interested in what something looked like. They were interested in how it performed. So to a Jew, an angel's appearance was functioning exactly as God would function. And so whether it was God or whether it was a messenger really didn't make no never mind, because it was all about God's will being made manifest. Nothing could oppose God's will. And so a couple of key points. These angels as agents of God, they're seen as divine tools or power conduits, not independent entities. The Hebrew word for angel, malach, means messenger. So angels are essentially manifestations or extensions of God's will, not independent beings with their own desires or the capacity to make independent decisions. They can't not act in disobedience to their Creator. The Jews believed that God had no opposition. God was the one without opposites. And so they had a limited function and they had a single purpose. Now this is really going to blow your mind. Each angel is created for a specific singular task or mission. Once that task is completed, the angel ceases to exist as that distinct manifestation, emphasizing their temporary functional role. This is why multiple angels were needed for different tasks in biblical stories, such as the three angels who visited Abraham, each with a unique role, one to announce Isaac's birth, one to destroy Sodom, and one to save Lot. And so they come into existence to fulfill a specific aspect of God's will, and then they come back out of existence. This is mainstream Jewish thought. And so, that being said, no rebellion by the angels is even possible. The concept of fallen angels who rebelled against God, as found in some Christian traditions, does not exist in normative Judaism. In Jewish texts, Hasatan, the adversary, is an agent of God whose specific job is to act as an accuser or an examiner, as seen in the book of Job, operating strictly under divine authority to test human free will, not as a rebel acting on his own volition. Now, Hasatan itself is a title. It's never a proper name in Scripture. It's the Satan, the adversary. Now, Lucifer, that we have come to associate with the devil, is actually a Latin translation of a different term, but it's also a title and never refers in the Bible to Hasatan. Lucifer is never connected to Hasatan. Lucifer, the Latin translation of the Hebrew Hillel ben Shachar, which means son of the dawn, or a shining one. It could mean the morning star, or light bringer, all of these things, is applied to the king of Babylon in the famous passage in Isaiah 14, which is usually used by Christians as the text of showing Satan falling from heaven, but the whole reference is to the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar. And Lucifer is also applied to Jesus. Yeah, I saw that look. 2 Peter 1:19. The Greek word phosphoros, when we get phosphorus, but it also means the same thing. It means light bringer or morning star. It's a description, but it's not a name. But it's applied to Jesus. What's going on there is that the churches and the assemblies that Peter is dealing with in what is now Turkey, we're getting a few years out. This would be the mid-60s, probably, when that letter was written. And the people were getting antsy because Jesus had not yet returned. The first followers of Jesus expected him to return in their lifetime. And when he wasn't returning, Peter is trying to bolster their faith. And he says, look, we have this prophecy that he will return, and you need to hold on to that prophecy like a lamp in the darkness until the day when the Son of the Dawn arises in your hearts. And the Son of the Dawn in context is Jesus. But the word phosphoros, when it's translated into Latin, is Lucifer. So if you look in the Vulgate, which is the Latin translation, Jesus is being referred to as Lucifer, as the Son of the Dawn, as the one who will bring the light that will arise in our hearts. These are titles. They aren't proper names. And it changes the way that we look at things. Free will is understood as a uniquely human feature to the Jews. In Jewish philosophy, free will, bechira, is a unique gift given exclusively to human beings. It is our messy choices and moral struggles that allow for real holiness to happen in the world, which is a central theme of human existence. There are some contrasting views in Judaism itself. The medieval Jewish philosopher and scholar Maimonides suggested that angels have free will within their narrow sphere of action, similar to humans within their limitations. In other words, angels can make impromptu decisions as they are accomplishing the task for God, but not in disobedience to God, in furtherance of God's will. And so here we have this completely different view of something that is fairly fundamental to us. What we believe about angels and devils and demons, what we believe about Satan or the devil, is completely different. So is your head spinning yet? Are you feeling a little disturbed? Are you ready to find a rock and start throwing it? But if you think about how much this change in worldview, this change in our just view of life and spirituality would change so many passages within Scripture with this different foundational meaning. Now, when I was talking about this years ago, my dear wife, Marion, asked a very practical question. Says, you keep talking about the Jews. How do we know the Jews are right? Are the Jews right about this? I have no idea. These are some things that we can't know. But what I do know is that these Jews wrote our scriptures. What they understood is written into the scriptures or is foundational to the meaning, even if it's just implied, that we're trying to glean from our point of view later on. And so knowing what they believed is important for us if we want to get down to the roots of what this is really all about. Does this have any practical value, talking about angels, whether they have free will? Are we just talking about how many angels can dance on the head of the pin? Is there any practical value here? And I believe that there is. When we look out at Christianity, what I see is a lot of fear still among Christians. A lot of fear there. Fear of God, misunderstanding what fear of God means. It doesn't mean afraid of God. It's mean having that awe, that sense of loss of self in the presence of God. It's fear of Satan, that Satan can somehow affect us, can lead us astray, can force us into a ditch somewhere and take us away from God's presence. But fear is never a part of an authentic experience with God, ever. It's not acceptable to God as written in our scriptures. And even a fear of Satan can lead us astray from that, lead us away. Because if we're experiencing fear, then we're not in kingdom. Jesus' kingdom that he is trying so hard for us to get to first understand and then experience is the opposite of fear. Kingdom is living without fear and also without superstition. It's not that just a belief in the devil is superstitious, but we take it to such lengths. It takes us away from the simple truth of the gospel, the simple truth that Jesus is trying to get across, which is simple consciousness of God's presence. That's what kingdom is. Take a look at 1 John 4. We have come to know and have believed the love which God has for us. God is love. And the one who abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this, love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment. Because as God is, so also are we in this world. That's a huge statement. As God is, so also are we in this world, if we are in God's presence, if we are animated by what animates God's. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. That couldn't be any clearer. That should be on the doors of every church. If we could just hang by that, put our stake in the ground right there, then everything else interpreted through that lens solves so much. There is no fear in an authentic experience of God. And the Jewish concept of Hasatan, as opposed to ours, removes fear. Think about it. It's emphatically stating that our choices are our own. We are the ones with free will, not these angelic beings, whatever or whoever they are. Satan, whoever or whatever Satan is, has no power over us that we don't give. And most often, what we're finding is that we're overcoming our own nature. We're overcoming the natural challenges that life places in our path. We need to see those challenges in a different light, not as evil or evil personified, but the way James looks at it. Look at James 1, verse 2. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, same word that's used for temptation in the wilderness experience of Jesus, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance, and let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. This is a very Jewish way of looking at life, which makes sense. James was Jesus' actual brother, at least traditionally. And so this adversary, Hasatan, or this adversity, this propensity for us to fall off the wagon, this adversary is an agent of maturity, an agent of our own completion, not to be feared, but to be welcomed. Count it all joy, because this is how we're going to grow. And remember, there's only one way to the Father. Look at John 14, verse 6. I am the way, the truth, and the life. This is Jesus speaking. No one comes to the Father but through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And so this is Jesus saying, this way that you see me living life, this way of going about being disturbed and allowing that disturbance to grow into the next open space and the one after that, is the only way to be able to get to the Father. The Father is too big to fit into whatever worldview we have settled upon for the moment. If we're not ready to explode that, if we're not ready to tear it down, if we're not ready to sell it, then we aren't going to be able to go where Jesus is going. The Father and the kingdom are really the experience of the same thing. We're talking about God's presence here. We're talking about complete and clear connection where there's no place for any fear. This is the only way to kingdom. This is the only way to the Father. And Jesus' way of living life right here and right now in perfect presence is kingdom. You don't possess it. You don't earn it. You don't even enter it in the way that we think of that. And even though it is stated that way metaphorically in Scripture, Jesus says it most clearly when he says these children are kingdom. We are kingdom when we get to that connection. And all of that is indistinguishable from the Father that Jesus is bringing to us. And there are no shortcuts. There are no other ways of doing this. You have to go through the way. Look what he says at John 10, verse 1. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. Skipping to verse 7. Truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. And Jesus is calling on their knowledge of what ancient sheepfolds look like. They would just build a rough structure, usually into the side of the hill, just 3 sides and the last side with a space. And sheep not beating the brightest bulbs on the tree. As soon as you put them in there, they don't even want to jump over. They'll go out through the space. But then the shepherd would actually lie down in the space and sleep in that space, and they wouldn't step over the shepherd. Jesus is literally the door to the sheepfold. The only way, legitimately, authentically, in and out, to be able to experience this kingdom, to be able to experience the Father, as Jesus is talking about. And this experience can't be taught. It can't be transferred. We can talk about it from now till something freezes over, right? But we're not going to get it. We have to live it. We have to experience it for ourselves. It has to be first person. It has to be a lived experience. And so what Jesus is really describing is a rite of passage. And we've talked about these rites of passage before. We've talked about heroes' journeys in here before. And we've talked about contemplative practice, all of which will take you to the same place because all of those have the same features. There is no way to see the Father. There is no way to experience the Father, be one with the Father, as Jesus talks about, but through this process, a lived process of living the way. So a rite of passage always has 3 phases. The first phase is separation, the second phase is transition, and the third phase is reincorporation. And so if you think about the walkabout of the Aborigines, and it's always the boys that have to do this, the girls have an internal rite of passage. It's biological, and it's woven into the culture of ancient civilizations and societies. But the boys don't have that. And so the boys always needed an extra way to be able to transition them from boys to men. And the first thing that would happen is when a boy was old enough, usually 12 or 13, he would be pulled from the company of the women. He would be pulled from his family and from the village and taken out into the bush where he was surrounded by men. And there would be some ritual there that would involve some sort of pain, usually a cutting or a tattooing or something that would leave a visible mark and then show that the wounding was the beginning of this journey. In the case of the walkabout, the young boy is then sent out into the bush for up to 6 months. Now, they have been prepared all their lives through the song lines and through their training to be able to survive in the bush and navigate their way. But it was still a perilous journey, and some did not survive. But if they did, and they came back, and they experienced the spiritual awakening that would occur that long in solitude, in the wilderness, and fending for yourself. When they came back, they could be reincorporated. They could be brought back into the company of the entire tribe or clan, but they're not the same anymore. Something has changed. They now bring something as men and recognized as men that they didn't have before. These are the 3 parts, necessary parts of a true rite of passage. And if you think about the hero's journey as portrayed even in our popular culture, I love Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. All those 3 parts of separation, transition, and reincorporation are present there, just as they are in any hero's journey. And so what Jesus is telling us is that separation, that first step, is absolutely essential. He phrases it as, sell everything that you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. Now we take that too literally, as he was a rich man and he needed to sell all his material possessions. But it really is, are you willing to let go of everything that's familiar to you? Are you willing to let go of everything that is comforting, everything that feels secure, everything that you piled up in your life to make you feel secure? Are you ready to let that go? Jesus works hard to get this separation part established and started in his followers. We talked about the Zen story 2 weeks ago about you can't fill an empty cup. Come back to me when your cup is empty. Come back to me when your mind is empty. Come back to me when you have beginner's mind and you can see this thing as if for the first time and not through the filter of everything that you think you know and everything that you're clinging to. Can you do that? Because if you can't, there is no way that you are going to be able to allow an experience of something so vast as the Father's presence. And when we understand Jesus this way, he feels dangerous. I mean, if he doesn't, then you're not really approaching Jesus as Jesus. He feels dangerous. He told us straight off, he didn't come to bring us peace. Peace understood as calm and tranquility. He is the Prince of Peace as shalom, but this other word that he used meant calm or tranquil. He didn't come to bring us that. He came to bring us a sword. And he talked about this separation starting right in the home. I am come to set father against mother. I've come to set father against son and daughter against mother and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law and all the members of the house. Because that's what happens when we really start off in a completely different direction. Nobody understands it. And it's threatening all of their security and their worldview, and they will fight you tooth and nail. Within your own home it starts, of course, because they're the ones closest to you. But Jesus is also using the family as a metaphor for the larger picture. It's going to put us at odds with everything that we think we know and everything that we do in order to get ourselves from point A to point B. Jesus feels dangerous because Jesus is taking us and has already taken himself to a place of perfect freedom. That's what he wants for us. You'll know the truth and the truth will make you free. Free of what? Free of everything that limits you. Free of everything that keeps you from this radical presence. And so he is free. He is teaching us the way, showing us the way to become free. And that's a dangerous place because perfect freedom stands outside of any security blanket that you can devise. Once you are free, you have stood outside of all of that. And this is going to lead us directly to the transition, which we have talked about as liminal space, standing on that threshold between worlds, not really having a camp of your own so much anymore, because you are now moving out into the wilderness, into this unknown space, something different. And it's disorienting. It's disturbing. If it's not, then you're not there. It will always be disturbing. Now, even the talk that we had about the Jewish Satan and about angelology that we talked about, that was disturbing and liminal for some of you. It was taking you to a place that just didn't jive. Saw it in your faces. That's okay. That's good. But why? Why is it always so difficult? There's a non-canonical gospel called Thomas. It's one that didn't make it into the Bible. But it's just a sayings gospel. It's just Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. No narrative, no structure to it. Which were probably the earliest gospels, were just sayings gospels. But there's some beautiful sayings in Thomas, if you ever get a chance to read it. And some parallel the sayings that we find in the canonicals, and others are truly different. But at saying number 2 in the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus said, "Those who seek should not stop seeking until they find. And when they find, they will be disturbed. And when they are disturbed, they will marvel, and they will rule over all." What he's saying is if you're willing to be disturbed, if you're willing to move out into this new territory, if you're willing to let go of the baggage that is keeping you limited, that is going to change everything, change your whole perspective about everything that's going on. These disturbances, these offenses, when we take offense, are always our first reaction to something that is radically different, something that challenges everything we know. The first reaction is always resistance, right? It's disturbance, it's offense. That's why it's so important for us to look at our offenses. What offends you? Why does it offend you? That is like the warning light on your dashboard that's telling you there's something unprocessed, something that needs to be taken a look at underneath the hood. This is the rich man and the camel that Jesus talks about, right? It's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to enter the kingdom. Why? Because we don't even realize how much stuff we're carrying around for our security. How many things that we have built up in our lives. When I was thinking about this, I love the movie, remember the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin? Nobody remembers The Jerk? Oh, okay. There's a few of you. He was kind of developmentally disabled, right? And he's going through life. But there's this one scene where he breaks up with his girlfriend and he's so mad he's going to leave, right? And he says, "Well, I'm going to go then. And I don't need any of this. I don't need this stuff and I don't need you. I don't need anything. Well, except this." And he picks up an ashtray. And that's it. And that's the only thing I need is this. I don't need this or this, just an ashtray. Oh, and this paddle game. The ashtray and the paddle game, that's all I need. And this remote control, the ashtray, the paddle game, and the remote control, that's all I need. And these matches, the ashtray and these matches and the remote control and the paddle ball and this lamp. The ashtray and this paddle game and the remote control and the lamp, that's all I need. And that's all I need too. I don't need one other thing, not one. Well, I need this. And he picks up a chair. The paddle game and the chair and the remote control and the matches for sure. And this, he picks up a magazine. And that's all I need. The ashtray, the remote control, the paddle game, this magazine, and the chair. And he walks outside. And I don't need one other thing except my dog. And the dog growls at him. Well, I don't need my dog. Silly. But what it does is it illustrates we don't even realize how many things that we're carrying around. Walk into your home. See all the stuff. Do you really need all that stuff? George Carlin does a great thing on stuff, all your stuff, all this stuff. But it's not just the exterior stuff. It's the interior stuff that really gets us. And we don't realize how much stuff is in there. And not just the cognitive stuff, but the unconscious stuff. And if we don't do the work to bring the unconscious up into the conscious, we'll never get rid of it. It'll always be down there. It'll always be running the show. It'll always be wagging the dog until we do the work. We're like, if you want to really be free, you got to end up being like a pioneer. Those pioneers that went west in their covered wagons, think about it. They were completely free. They were seeing territory that white people had never seen before. And you could basically just pick a spot. This real nice green spot next to the river. I like this spot. And you could build a house, and there was no regulation, and there were no building permits, and there was nothing to keep you from just being able to go. You didn't have to pay any taxes. But on the other hand, when the Indians came, when the wildfires came, there was no 911. There was no police. There was no fire. You were on your own. See, we have to trade security for freedom and freedom for security. And so it's always a delicate balance. But this idea of these pioneers, fully free, but also fully at risk. And as we move through this transition and trying to figure all this stuff out, then we come back to the reincorporation. And this is where, again, I can return to Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Because when Dorothy starts off in black and white Kansas, and she's really unhappy, and she's yearning for something over the rainbow that's going to fulfill her. And then she ends up in Oz after the wounding with the dog and all the other things that were going on. When she takes that journey and she finally comes back to black and white Kansas, and looking at the same ring of faces, what does she say? She says, the next time I go looking for my heart's desire, I'm not going to go looking any further than my own backyard. Because if it's not there, I never really lost it to begin with. See, what Dorothy figured out and what we all figure out when we take this journey is that we didn't have to take the journey. Well, we had to take the journey to find out we didn't have to take the journey. That everything that we needed, everything that we can possibly have from a spiritual point of view, we already possess. It's already ours. When Jesus comes back from the wilderness, the first thing he says is the waiting is over. The kingdom is here. The kingdom is now. Everything is already here. He had to take a disturbing journey through the wilderness to find out that he already had everything. He was already one with the Father. And where is this kingdom that Jesus talks about? In Luke 17, he says it's not going to be out there to find by observation. You're not going to acquire it. It's already within. It's among. It's in the midst. And going back to the Gospel of Thomas, saying 3, Jesus said, if your leaders say to you, look, the Father's kingdom is in the sky, then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you it's in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the Father's kingdom is inside you and outside you. And when you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. Wow. Jesus comes back from the wilderness bringing truth with him. He comes back changed by that truth. Just as Moses came back whitened, right, by the experience of God on Sinai, everything changes. Having gone through the rite of passage, having gone through the authentic experience. Richard Rohr says it really well in his book, Everything Belongs, when we went through this years ago. He talks about contemplative practice, and he talks about it as navigating between the circumference and the center of a circle. The circumference of the circle, or the skin of a sphere, is where we live. We live on the surface of things. We live along the circumference. But everything that we really need to inform our lives and to bring meaning and purpose to them is in the center. And the only way that you get to the center is by selling the circumference. You have to sell the circumference. You have to let go of that. Let go of it as your primary connection with life. That is a separation. That is the transition we're talking about. And then you reincorporate back to the circumference because that's where we really live. But you're changed now by the experience. Dorothy was completely useless on the farm. But when she comes back, now she has something to offer, something to give her family and everyone who will be connected with her. And we find that this life is a lifelong oscillation between the circumference and the center of rites of passage and journeys, heroes' journeys. And we use the circumference as the base camp that takes us to the summit. We can use the circumference as the base camp that will take us to the center if we start to understand what we're really doing here. And it's the same with the 4 ways and the 5th way. Same as the circumference and the center. The 4 ways are how we deal with everything that we need along the circumference. But it's only the 5th way that is going to take us to the center. Until we take the 4 ways and turn them inside out and stand them on their head, they will in no way be able to take us where we really want to go. It's just the 5th way that has the power to take us to center, take us to Father. Why? Because the Father is too big, too radical, too disturbing to fit into the 4 ways. You see, we can travel the 4 ways and not have to give up any of our stuff. That's why we like the 4 ways. And in fact, the 4 ways are made of our stuff. And so they work just fine together. But they will not take us where we really want to go, because we can't acquire God the way we acquire anything else in life. We can't contain God. We can't understand God. But we can experience God. From Everything Belongs, Richard Rohr says, "We are led to the conclusion that growth in the spiritual life takes place not by acquisition of something new. It isn't like the acquisition of new information. In reality, our growth is hidden. It is accomplished by the release of our current defense postures, by the letting go of fear and our attachment to self-image. Thus, we grow by subtraction much more than by addition. It's not a matter of more and better information. The wisdom traditions say that information itself is not the key. Once our defenses are out of the way and we are humble and poor, truth is allowed to show itself. It is not acquired. It shows itself when we are free from ideology and fear and anger. I know, quote unquote, won't get us anywhere. The truth is, I don't know anything. Our real hero is Forrest Gump. Perhaps he was a metaphor for beginner's mind. Only non-knowing is spacious enough to hold and not distort the knowing that is possible." It's about allowing yourself to realize that you don't know, to get into that place of non-knowing, of selling everything, the willingness to be disturbed. And to go back to that last section of Thomas 3, "When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, if you haven't done this work we're talking about, if the unconscious that you don't even know about still rules you, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty." So when we finally come to know ourselves, or begin to know ourselves, who are we? Who is that person? Richard Rohr puts this in the same book. "The Cherokee chief said to their young braves, 'Why do you spend your time in brooding? Don't you know that you are being driven by great winds across the sky? Don't you know that you're part of a much bigger pattern, but you're not in control of it any more than you would be by great winds of great winds? You and I are a small part of a much bigger mystery.' Who we are is part of this immense purpose that we can't see and we can't even imagine in our minds. We must make a journey to discover that we didn't have to take the journey, but in order to experience what we can't see and what we can't imagine in our minds. It can be experienced. We just can't hold it here. It's too big. The truth of who we really are is that we are creatures born into free will. The only creatures that God has created, according to the Jews, that have this capacity. We are born into free will, the ability to choose, the ability to actually love as the Father loves. Driven by great winds, driven by the breath of the Spirit, just as Jesus was driven into the wilderness. And we will never know our true identity until we take this journey, until we take our walkabout. until we allow ourselves to be disturbed, whether by a simple scriptural passage or a theological tenet or a life-threatening illness. It's all the same as an exercise in allowing ourselves to start the process of relinquishment, letting go, allowing ourselves to actually meet the adversary, meet Hasatan, doing his job on us, which is to challenge us, to give us alternatives, to give us the testing that we need to become complete. Let him do his job, to welcome and count it all joy when we do encounter these various trials and tribulations, and see them as a growth, another growth spurt to the Father. Are we willing to be disturbed is the basic question that we need to ask, because it really is the price of admission. I wanted to finish with a prayer that was attributed to Francis Drake. You all know Sir Francis Drake, English privateer, which basically means he was a pirate working for a country. He was also an explorer, and he was the second person to circumnavigate the globe after Magellan. But Magellan died during the voyage, and he actually survived. So it's a big deal. On the eve of his leaving Plymouth, England, on the Golden Hind to take his circumnavigation multi-year tour, he wrote a prayer that is written into his ship's logs, as the story goes, and read it to his crew before they left. And you may have heard this one before, but just close your eyes and take a listen. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we dreamed too little, when we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. When having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity. And in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land, we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push back the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. And all this we ask in the name of our captain, who is Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Father, that's our prayer. Whether we're ready to pray it or not, whether we're ready to act on it or not, help us to begin to see more and more clearly that until we're willing to be disturbed, until we're willing to risk the things that we have accrued out of security, that we can't really follow you and experience who you are. Let that awe us. Let that right size our relationship with you in humility and vulnerability and fearless dependence. Help us to value that. Help us to value being disturbed and offended as proof that we are going someplace different and new and potentially groundbreaking. Help us to love the journey more than the destination. And all along the way, thank you for your presence and thank you for your guidance, and never, ever losing sight or track or thought of us, and never ceasing to love us, Lord. Never let us forget that we can only love because you loved us first. And we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's all stand.